we have a question from one of the members at the First Spiritualist Church, and she had a question about ego. She wanted our perspective on the ego, what our thoughts into it. And so tonight we're going to open up the discussion on that.
Okay, and I think with anything like this, it's really important to define what we think of as the ego, because everyone defines it differently. That's one of the biggest things I've struggled with as I read about the ego is I feel like everyone has a different take on what it is. For me, I've always defined it as the part of me that identifies as being separate from everything else. So the part of me that sees me as an individual, not connected to a source, not connected to the world around me. That's how I've always viewed it. But let's see how both of you think about it.
So I think of the ego as a compass. It's a guidance system for me, kind of for me to know if I'm in the vortex or out of it, in the flow or not. So for me, when I feel like the ego rises up, I get uncomfortable. Like my stomach feels like upset, and it's either if somebody has said something or if it's an experience that's happening and I want to either go on the defense or I want to like cower to it. And I feel like my ego is a guidance system for me to say, hey, wait a minute, take a step back.
Which actually fits really well with how I defined it, because that feeling that you're getting is you separating yourself from that source perspective, pulling yourself away from that, feeling defensive or angry. So actually it's pretty in sync. But I like the idea of using it as a compass. It's like using it as a tool.
And you kind of check in with it, or it's just going to like be an alarm. It's going to say, hey, something's not right here. And so for me now, I can take that step back and observe from the perspective of the observer, as opposed to feeling like I need to suppress the ego, or I need to attack, or I need to defend, because again, it can be something that can be its own energy.
Yeah, let's get back to that. Let's get Joe's definition first, though.
Yeah, I think it's a tool that we bring with us when we come to this dimension. I think that,
I like that.
Like any tool, it can, if it's used properly, it works for us, and if we mishandle it, it can be detrimental to our path. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Yeah. And I think that we have to realize that it is a tool, and not empower it to do things it's not supposed to do.
It's not us. But it's a tool.
It's a tool that we have access to.
Yes.
And I mean, in this we'll get into more about how we use this particular tool or our ego throughout our lives. And we'll also touch on, I'm sure, some of the things that we give it energy that it doesn't need to be. You know what I mean? It's like, there are some things, some tools that you just don't, you don't build a house with I was going to say a rock or something, but you don't build it with, just one tool. An axe or something, because, it can help
destroy
you,
it.
But you can also, there are other tools you can use
that are better.
Or fire. You don't build a house with fire.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that's what we're going to probably be talking about tonight, about the way we access our egos, and how it interacts, and how we really have to keep an eye on it, or treat it what it is, and not overinflate it. And I don't mean that with the pun intended, overinflate our ego, but overinflate the power that it has. Well, because then it will take over our persona.
Once you start identifying with it, that's where the real problem
is.
I think
right. Don't give it power.
I like the idea of the tool, because with any tools are nothing until somebody picks it up and actually uses it.
Right.
So
and
from
uses
that
it properly.
Consciousness, using it as a tool and being able to know that you're, I don't want to say in control of it, but you're the one that's using it, and it's not something that's using you.
Right.
And that's the double-edged sword.
Exactly. Like I said, it can be, fire's a great thing, but misuse it, and it's destructive.
Yeah.
So I think
that was good.
That was good. It's a good episode. It's a wrap.
Now we have to get into the the minutiae of it. Nathan, like you said, I think it's been written about so much, and it's been put into so many examples.
And there's the psychology. The psychology has a different way of looking at it than spiritual.
It's Plato. It's been pulled apart, turned around, manifested in different ways. And by the time you try to get your head around it, you can't, because it's like water.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that we give it too much.
Power?
We give it too much power, and we give it too much,
Leeway, too.
and we put it on a pedestal.
Yeah.
I think sometimes,
Or you want to like banish it. Like we got to destroy it, as you were saying early. Like you're either going to put it on a pedestal or you're going to like have to destroy it. And
Instead of just putting it back in the toolbox, I don't need it right now. Instead of destroying it, and it's there if I need it, but I'm going to go about my life and my connection to source, and draw in that great energy, because I have the ability to do that. Because when I rely on the ego, that's going to help me here on the physical plane, but it's going to cut off that connection I have to spirit.
I love that.
So
Yes.
I want to kind of keep that where it belongs, and I'm not going to, bake a pie with a chainsaw.
Let's
Like that
hope.
one. Ding.
Ding.
That's a good
but
one.
when it's so many people look at it and they identify it, when they get into spiritual practice, they see it, well, the ego is the false self, because it's the part of you that identifies as being separate. So then they think, well, I need to destroy, like you said, kill the false self so that I can be who I really am. But now you're just creating this concept of a war that's existing within you, and you're never going to, if you're at war with yourself, you're never going to win.
I feel like
Right.
it's also, and I call it a compass, because I feel like it's a navigator to show you the work that still needs to be done. I mean, we're all here having experiences, and it's all about growth in the person that we are, right? Expanding in so many ways. And I think the ego can show us where we still have some work to do. And remember, all the parts of us have to be moving forward together, right? All these parts that we're working with, all these experiences that we have, and that's why I like to incorporate it as a compass, because it's like a navigator for us. Like, okay, this has made me really upset, and it's like, okay, instead of like fighting it, suppressing it, pretending it's not happening, and saying, okay, where's the work? Okay, what's holding me back from this? And being able to sit with it in that space. And then, like you said, befriending it. Thank you for that. And then what happens, I think it lessens the impact and speeds up the recovery process.
Well, like you said, you thank it because you need it to a certain extent to help you with certain self-doubt.
Yeah.
With
Where you're at.
to help push you forward, and not feeling like confused, like, oh, I'm doing it for myself or I'm doing it for someone else. That's where you have to be really careful. I don't think you should ask ego the questions. I think it should be there
Definitely.
as a support mechanism, but not in a position of a guidance. Guidance, like as in guide.
Now, my question
Not
is...
in like a compass, but like in a guidance.
So you brought up a good point. My question is the ego the mind?
I think
So, because it comes like when we're operating, like you were saying, when we're operating from the mind. One of the quotes that I had recently gotten was like, when you're operating from the mind and navigating from that place, it's like following a dysfunctional compass in the Bermuda Triangle.
So-
like eventually, and that's why I wonder, like, where is the ego? Like,
I
what
would
do you
say,
think?
So my first thought about that is the mind is the creator of concepts, and the ego is just a concept about yourself.
Say that again.
So the mind is a creator of concepts. The concepts are, a generalization about things. So I can look at you and say, well, you're both people, and that's a wall, and that's a door. Even though every door is different, every person's different, but you put it into concepts so
see.
you can create language about it.
Gotcha.
So the ego is really a concept about yourself. Nathan is this person who is spiritual, but Nathan is someone who is, middle class. Nathan's someone who's, this color skin. Nathan. So you're identifying yourself certain ways and
Gotcha.
creating this.
Which in turn separates you.
Well, it separates you from the limitless possibilities that you really are, that the soul is this infinite potential. And here you are, by identifying yourself in all these different ways, creating this ego persona. You're actually limiting yourself because you're not actually able to see yourself for what you are. You're identifying yourself as, I am this job, I make this much money, I have, this many friends, I have this house, I have this. And that
Which
these
is
concepts,
really not you, it's everything outside of you.
Yeah.
And you're saying, is that what the ego identifies as?
I think the ego
Those-
is the collection of those concepts about
Gotcha.
yourself.
I think the ego can push you. I think you could still have the ego and still have, not be confined, can be opened, and you can use it as a mechanism to drive you to do things.
And as long as you understand that you're not the ego, the ego perspective can help motivate and push you forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a tool to, like we get back to, it's like, how's it related to the mind? I think the mind, I just think, well, first of all, I think the mind is a contact point between the human body and our spiritual bodies.
Well, because most
It's
often,
like a computer, like.
people are operating like their mind is one place and their body is another.
The mind's a filter, I think, too. I really look at it as, our brains filter out 90% of the information coming into us because we can't take it all in. And so concepts have to be created so that when you look out in a field and there's all these different trees, you need to be able to say, group of trees, check, grass, check. Because if you were taking in all the information of every blade of grass and all of that, you wouldn't be able to focus on anything else. It's too much information.
Right.
So the mind's a filter, and I think it works as a filter for spiritual information, a filter for what we think of ourselves as, a filter for everything.
And it's a timekeeper saying, all right, it's time, I want to do this in my life, so let's activate these certain things. We're going to activate creativity, we're going to activate, the ego to give me self-confidence that I can do this. Now, when does it hook up with the heart? Because a lot of times when we're doing things, the ego will start or motivate us, it becomes emotional. And that kind of resonates in your heart. So when do they meet? And can one take over the other?
Well, I think they work in conjunction.
Right.
So for my example, when I left my corporate job as a paralegal, my heart was telling me it's time to go. Like, you don't fit here anymore. You're not happy. It's robbing you of your quality of life.
Because the concepts don't exist in the heart. Those exist within the mind.
So when I left, I felt like I was using my mind to say, okay, girl, you have this many bills. You have to make this much money. In order to do that, you have to have this many clients. And this is how much you can afford based on what you have. So I was using my mind to able to give structure to what the heart was telling me it was time to do. So I opened my practice, but I was using my mind to set a plan to saying, like, okay, I can't just quit my job and just open up this space and not know what the energy needs into, how many clients I need to make, how much I can afford. And I feel like that was me using the mind and the heart.
But I wouldn't say the ego necessarily.
No.
I would say the mind and the heart.
Yeah.
Ego.
Well, the ego was saying you belong in that corporate job. Yeah. Like, the ego was telling me, like, you're crazy. You were making good income. Like, why are you doing this? But the heart is like,
because the ego embraced that concept of success as money.
And I think that's a good way to separate them out. So I was using the power of my brain to put that information. I was using my heart to guide me on what felt right to the next step. And then I was also seeing the ego that was kind of making me pause. Like, okay, you sure you really want to leave this job? Are you really sure? And I was like, oh, hell yeah, I ain't going back to that. But it all, like, that's why it says, like, it kind of pulls you back a little bit and gives you that just to kind of check in and make sure it's all on the same page and be able to move forward.
I wonder if it's used to, like, a comfort zone, to keep people in the comfort zone so they're not up and down, kind of not knowing where to go. I think you had just brought up a really good point about the ego and emotions.
Well, I was saying that the ego identified with success being money, even though the heart was identifying success with, like, joy and passion and what really works for you.
I think the heart can trump the ego.
I think the ego can trump the heart too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It depends on where you place the focus.
Right, but
But in that place, my heart trumped the.
Yeah. Exactly, and I think when a lot of times, if it's coming from a good place, like we tend to say, we push the ego to the side and we do it out of goodness or faith or something like that, and it just resonates with us so much higher that we can connect to the other side, our true being. I don't think the ego can make that connection to the other side. I think it's actually, now that we're talking about it, I think it's more like a door. It's a tool, it's a blunt instrument, it's a tool, but it is a door just opens one way.
Yeah. And that's why, because with that definition of the ego being the part that sees you as separate, the ego can't open up to the other side.
Right.
Because it sees itself as separate from that.
Right.
And
that's not its job either.
And it wants to attack it because it brings up being uncomfortable.
Well,
and
uncomfortable. Think about it. If the ego defines itself as being the separate part, then every time you're opening up to the other part, in essence, you're fighting against the ego, saying that's not who I am. It's almost like death to the ego in a way.
And
that
there's a
sense of
survival
conflict.
technique built into the ego that
Yeah.
we need in this
Yeah,
dimension.
totally. Absolutely.
So I mean, it's primal, and it came with the body. I was going to say it came with the kit.
Yeah, it reins you back a little bit and saying, hey, like,
Yes.
are you sure? Are you sure? And then the heart is like, yes, I'm so sure. And then there are other parts that you're like, hey, you know what? Like, maybe I need a better plan here. Maybe I need to think this a little further. Maybe I need to go over and see, and then be able to make decisions from that place.
Now the question is, does in that moment where the ego is telling you that and you start thinking that way, are you allowing the ego to rob you of that joy to the point where the heart is not as strong as the ego anymore?
It can
Right.
happen.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think it happens like a million times a day. Like, I
Yeah.
think it's so minuscule that people don't realize, like, when I went through that big life change with my job. Now that's something huge, but I also feel on a smaller end, people have these like experiences flipping back and forth like daily.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Because the ego can it can block stuff. I mean, it's just everything that we teach or we hear others talk about getting in touch with yourselves, meditation, that's all coming from the heart. And I think also even when decision making and how to find joy in your life, that all comes from the heart. And the mind and the ego is just there to get you from point A to B without
give you the
without
steps.
getting injured or
Yeah.
without trying to plot out what's the best way. But you got to lead from the heart. And sometimes the ego will step in and say, no, we're going to do it my way.
Now, I also feel that external forces, people, places, things, ideas, conditioning can also feed that. So I feel like as intuitives,
External.
external,
In
what do you
quotes.
mean?
Well, because nothing's really
Oh,
external.
yes. So,
That's the ego talk, the separate
yes.
But I know what you mean.
language thing. But yeah, keep
Yeah.
going. I didn't wanna
Outside
cut off your point.
stimulus
Like school or the media or things like that.
or other people's free will.
But from what I see is people like me, caregivers, people who are sensitive, like intuitive in that space, we can tend to be more impressionable.
Yeah.
We can I say like social chameleons. We can absorb into the environments, and other people's problems can be our own if we're not careful. And I think that feeds our ego in the fear, and not so much the ego boastful and I'm better, you're not. But in our realm, I think a lot of times what we don't realize is we can absorb into other people's worries and fears, and eventually that becomes ours, and then it becomes comfortable. Like, okay, if you're turning on the news, for example, and it's making you not feel good, and when you're done, you're anxious and you're fearful and you can't sleep, why do you keep turning it on? That ego is telling you, you need to listen, you need to know, you need to. So being able to, like you said, navigate going back into the heart, like, okay, I've got to listen to this place. Like, this doesn't feel good. This relationship doesn't feel good. This job doesn't feel good. Going in and do you feel like you have to create space, though, to find the answers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be a real sense of self-awareness to not get caught up in all of that, and to really understand, what's going on, like to understand perspective on things. I think the spiritual community is a really great place to see people that are working beyond the ego, and also see people that think they are, that are actually working within the ego, because there's a lot of people that get into this because they feel like if they help other people, it will make them feel worthy, and that's coming at it from an ego place. And so they don't realize that. They think like, oh, I like helping people, but
look at me.
Yeah.
Well, I'm doing it.
And sometimes it's not even like,
Or there's
like
broken pieces here, and they think if they fix or save or change like this, they'll feel better about themselves.
if they can change the image in the mirror, they change themselves. But it doesn't work that way. And so it's really interesting. You have to really be self-aware, and when something comes up like that, be like, is this thought that's coming up one of connectedness? Is this coming from a place where I know that there's no separation between me and you? Or is this coming from a place of feeling separated and saying, how do I survive amongst this chaos that exists outside? Hi, everybody. If you like what you watched, please subscribe on YouTube and like us on Facebook. And check out our website at alwaysconsiderthesource.com.
Hey, if you want us to come out to your location and do a live setup, we'd love to do that. Continue to send in your questions, and we look forward to interacting with you.
And remember, always consider the source.